Welcome to Building Human Solidarity, the Voices of Women. Thank you for coming. We're so happy you're here with us today. Before we begin our program, I have asked each of our speakers to lead us in prayer. Nontando, would you begin by leading us in a Christian prayer?
Our Creator, God, we pray for peacemakers across the world, women, men, children, youth, to join hands and circle Ukraine and Russia, to remove the barriers against peace, and to build instead the building blocks of a new nation of Ukraine, a new leadership that will once again allow children to run the streets, that will bring back the refugees back to their home, not the home that is bombed out, but a new home, a new nation, a new vision, and a new world where war is no longer tolerated. We ask this in the name of the great peacegiver, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Nihal, would you lead us in a Muslim prayer?
Sure. In the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful, all praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, the most gracious, the most merciful, ruler of the day of recompense. It is you, God, we worship, and you we ask for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of those upon whom you have bestowed favor, not of those who have evoked your dislike, or of those who go astray. O God of peace, we ask you to remove all our troubles, all the disasters and wars intensified recently all over the world. In this time of great worry, we pray that you sustain all the people of Ukraine and Russia to be vigilant and dedicated to peace and justice. We pray for all those who fear for tomorrow, that you can comfort them. Grant the world leaders wisdom, prudence, and compassion. We pray in your name. Amen.
Thank you.
Right.
In this era of transition that we are experiencing today, we need to explore the enormous capacities of women for breaking through and beyond the divisions that exist in our world, culturally, religiously, in economics, politics, in the environment, and in technology. Today is the first of a bi-monthly series, Building Human Solidarity, the Voices of Women, which will bring together women, leaders in their field, to share their diverse perspectives. Global Ministries University, Gonzaga University Institute for Interreligious Dialogue and Islamic Studies, and the Harmony Institute in Nairobi are co-sponsoring this series. These interactive presentations will be explored further with other significant topics of our era in the February 2nd to 4th, 2023 Global Interfaith Conference, Walking Together in the Spirit of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, which will be coming to you from 4 hubs in Africa, in Europe, in South India, and in the Americas. Stay tuned. More information on the speakers and dates for Building Human Solidarity, the Voices of Women, and for the call for papers for the next February conference, Walking Together in the Spirit of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, will be coming to you. And now for our program today. Our format will be for me to introduce each of our speakers. They will speak for 20 minutes, one after the other, and then immediately afterwards, they will have the opportunity to offer any immediate response to each other before I begin to take questions from the audience. So beginning with you, Dr. Nontando Hadebe, you are a theologian and an international coordinator for Side by Side, a faith movement for gender justice. You are a member and actually a chair of the South African Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, as well as the TCCRSA Women's Caucus, comprising Catholic women theologians in Africa. You were a visiting fellow at the Jesuit School of Theology, Santa Clara University, and a Fulbright scholar in residence at Emmanuel College, Boston. You completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of South Africa, where you participated in groundbreaking research on gender and theological education in South African institutions. You co-edited the book, A Time Like No Other, COVID-19 in Women's Voices. Thank you for being here, Dr. Hadebe. Please, your speech will be, or your presentation today, will be the three-legged pot of 3 C's in the lives of African women: cultural, constitution, and Christianity. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Marita. Thank you to my fellow panelists, Dr. Sahan, the Harmony Institute, Mary, and to all who are attending this presentation. Thank you to the vision to be able to see the significance of women's voices. I wanted to begin with the way in which the word voice has taken a very powerful meaning. When people feel powerful, they say we have a voice. When people feel powerless, they say we don't have a voice. And so this word voice is actually a signature or a reflection of the status of a group of people. I was alarmed at a statistic that I read that women's voices in scripture are less than 2%. And also another statistic that spoke about women in media as well, that they really do not have a high representation. But I think we can agree that women's voices and presence are growing across the world. You know, you listen to the news or you hear women's voices at official levels, but still we need to hear more of women's voices. And I want to talk about stories, because it's through stories that we begin to understand the realities of women's voices. And so I use the three-legged pot as an introduction, because the three-legged pot is synonymous with Africa. And it also is synonymous with women's activities. We are not saying only women cook, but very much synonymous. And this three-legged pot represents the three spheres of women's lives. Women here that they are equal, constitutionally and through human rights. This is the agenda that we are finding throughout Africa. You know, even the African Union itself is pushing an agenda of women's equality and power. At the same time, women belong to different ethnic groups. So they hear a cultural narrative that tells them what their place is in society. And then majority of lay persons in all churches, not just Catholic, are women. So when they step into a parish or a particular church, they hear messages telling them this is what a woman should do, a woman is responsible for, and many of those messages can be disempowering. So you can imagine, think of just an average woman who is a teacher, or works in a company. She steps into her workplace and she's told that the sky is the limit. There are programs to encourage her development because she is a possessor of human rights. She steps out of her workplace and she goes home, and she's told that your place as a woman in this family is that you are subordinate to your husband, to the relatives that are in the home. So she's got to change gears and be a different person. And then she will go to a local parish and she will hear messages that define her either as inferior or as the instigator of sin, or as somebody who has been told to keep quiet, somebody who has no access to leadership because of being born female. So you can imagine in this life where a person is moving through 3 different spheres that are not coordinated or sending the same message. And so it took the listening to women's stories to be able to gather this reality. And then I want to go on to the story of the Circle of Women Theologians, because they, particularly when it comes to faith, they stood up. And I want to tell the story of how, through listening to the voices of women living in contradictions, they were able to enter into these areas of contradictions and be able to raise women's voices, women's agencies, and to resist patriarchy and all forms of speech, beliefs, and practices that diminish the value of women, that diminish, that in fact, that rob the world of the riches that women possess. Really to marginalize over half of the population and to exclude their participation and their gifts, I think is one of the highest forms of abuse and violence against women. So let me tell the story of the Circle. The Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians started to realize, listening the stories of women in their parishes, they realized that no one is listening to women's stories. Women are fed theology. There is no mutuality in the beliefs that are being given to them. No one is listening to what women are experiencing. And so the Circle decided that they are going to make the source of their theology women's stories, so that women are given the opportunity to reflect on their day-to-day experiences as they relate to the teachings of the church, as they relate to life in general. So they took a stand in 1989 and they said, we are going to listen. We are going to make the issues that affect women the topics of our theology. And I just want to give examples of the projects that were done. We know that Africa was in the grip of the HIV and AIDS pandemic. And from the United Nations, it was clear that women were the most infected and affected. And particularly in those countries where heterosexual sex was the main mode of transmission. And then the gathering of stories started to say, why is this happening? Because being vulnerable represents a violation of rights. So the stories started to emerge, and painful stories. I remember women who remained loyal to their husbands, who were faithful, who were churchgoers, being infected because the men were not being subjected to the same kind of morality. And so women started to speak up and to say our vulnerability is all linked to who we are. It's all linked to the way in which we are constructed in church and the way we are constructed in our culture. And so African women theologians began to say, let's interrogate this theology. Let's look at what women are hearing in churches that places them in a position of such vulnerability and belief that somehow their inferiority is something that is willed by God. And so this process began, and as they began to talk to women, other issues emerged, because inequality is also linked to gender-based violence, and gender-based violence was also identified as one of the drivers of HIV and AIDS. So it was like this hornet's nest. They began to look into the lives of women and see how the gender inequality, the way in which women's roles and women's identities were constructed, were actually at the root of their vulnerability to HIV. And so while HIV, we understand, is a virus, but for a pandemic to flourish, it needs a social context. For people to be vulnerable in a pandemic, it means there's a social context that allows that to happen. And so what I'm saying is that the Circle of African Women Theologians didn't start with textbooks to say, let's talk about gender from textbooks. They started with the voices of women, saying, let's talk about your stories. Let's talk about how HIV is affecting you. And from these, they opened up. They began to see the reality of women's experiences and begin to dig theologically to say, how have we arrived to this position where women feel and experience inferiority as their identity rather than being equal daughters of God, made in the image of God? What has happened to the theology? And so this unpacking, this looking at, at all of this, just drawing from the experiences of women and allowing that to shape. And another point I think that was significant is that the first book, that one of the first books that was published by the Circle was called Taluta Kum. If you can remember, that is those are the words that Jesus said to the young girl who was dead. And so many saw that young woman and being risen from the dead became a symbol. That story took on a symbolic meaning for women, that we are being awakened from a state of death where we accepted our inferiority, where we accepted certain interpretations that resulted almost in death, in our diminishing of life. And so suddenly women began to reclaim the scriptures for themselves in order to allow the scriptures to speak the experiences. So little girl arise, woman arise. And then even the story of Tamar, the rape of Tamar, became a lens through which women could talk about their experiences of violation, whether at work or in the parishes or in their homes. So suddenly those voices, those silenced voices of women in scripture were awakened to be able to join with the voices of women experiencing these multiple violations. So it became a theology that not only awakened women to their own agency, but also going to the scriptures and revisiting the scriptures in ways in which voices that were almost erased were allowed to emerge so that women could find their voices. And even the image of God, the dominant masculine images of God, the exclusion of women from representation is also, something that is, that is a form of violence, because on one hand, women are said to be made in the image of God, and yet that is never unpacked. So women are also in a dilemma of who they are in their relationship with God, and that has a diminishing effect on their capacity to participate. And so through those stories, there was an awakening of the lives of women and putting those lives out there for governments to be in solidarity with women, to realize that the vulnerability of women can be traced to constructions of masculinities, and also even understanding that it's not only women who were suffering from these constructions of femininities, but even men, that some constructions of masculinities, forced men to be either, so strong that they don't want to go to the hospital to check up on their HIV status, or that part of their identity is to be dominant over women. So all of these began to unpack and began to show how the way in which we've understood what it means to be male or female has been in ways that are destructive. But it took women speaking their stories, women putting their stories out there. And then again, the whole ecology, and you mentioned Laudato Si. African women saying, yes, Pope Francis says the cry of the earth is the cry of the poor, but majority of those who are poor are women. So the same system of domination that allows human beings to exploit the earth comes from a hierarchical relationships between humanity and the earth. Human beings feel like because they're made in the image of God, they can exploit the earth. They can do whatever they want. And so that same hierarchical logic is operating with women and other, marginalized groups like LGBTI, people who are differently abled. So we see that the stories becomes the lens or the windows to be able to understand the realities. And so when women's voices are heard, they become part of the healing of the earth, because the violence against the earth, the violence against women, the violence against people that are outside of the margins, all of that is exposed. And so that is why when it came to COVID, we said we want to hear women's stories. Again, the statistics came out, the high levels of violence, as well as, and even the whole, prevention of COVID, that works against many poor women. Where, if you are living in a crowded environment, where do you social distance? If you don't have any sanitation or running water, where do you wash your hands? If you don't have any savings and you are a trader and you are told that to be locked in, where do you get your food security? And so this way of perceiving reality through stories is a contribution of the women's movement. It's saying we've got to open up, we've got to allow people to tell their stories so that the reality can be seen. And so often, in terms of even the ethics around marriage, the ethics around sexuality, women are the ones that suffer the most, because women's stories are not being listened to. Women's voices are not being listened to. And so there's no harmony. There's no beauty that is emerging. There's no life-giving. Even marriage, we see through COVID that many women were killed during this time because they were forced to live in the home with their abusers. And so we begin to try to unpack what we understand marriage is, that the whole theology of marriage needs to be constructed in a way in which it does not tolerate any form of violence or hierarchy. So the stories of women, the stories of women's experiences become almost the window, become even the lens through which all reality is understood. Because if we are going to have harmony, if we are going to have solidarity, it doesn't start with anything. It starts with an understanding of the realities of women. It allows women to speak and to say, this world that we find ourselves in is a world that marginalizes, that oppresses us. It's a world that needs us. And women are their own liberators. Women theologians are restructuring theology in order to liberate women. And I know, am I running out of time? I need to close.
Yes, please close.
Yes. So basically what I'm saying is that when we are talking about women's voices, we need to be serious. We need to create those platforms where women's voices are at the center of whatever is being done, whether it's the synod, whether it's theology, whether it's seminary training. The voices of women reflect the reality of life. They also reflect the hope of a new world where personhood, where community, where equality thrives, and where the theology sustains that. So listen to women if you want the world to change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nontando Hadebe. And now it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Nihal Sahan, who is a computer engineer with a master's degree from Lehigh University, Pennsylvania, and a doctorate in theology from Global Ministries University. Nihal currently teaches at Santa Clara University. She is a social activist working on the areas of women's rights, youth, mentoring and education, compassion, and social justice projects. She serves as Vice President of Programs for the Silicon Valley chapter of the United Nations Association. And she is a board member of the Silicon Valley Interreligious Council and Global Ministries University. Dr. Sahan will speak on wellness in action, regaining women's potential one refugee at a time. Dr. Sahan.
Hi, Marita. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure and honor for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. And my second reflex basically is to share a PowerPoint presentation, if you allow me, so that I will have some focus.
Of course.
Okay. There you go. All right. Just a second. Okay. First of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have been living in the United States for about 28 years. I spent most of my time in the United States, then in Turkey. I have Turkish origins. The reason that I came to United States was to have my graduate studies in Pennsylvania. Anyway, for about 20 years in the United States, I had a constant circle of friends, and my circle of friends did not change much. My circle of friends in the Turkish community mostly. However, for the last 7 or 6 years, there has been a lot of Turkish refugees and immigrants coming to the area. For that reason, new people joined my circle of friends, basically. This is due to some of the ongoing things. The things are going on all around the world. Turkey has its share, of course, and all the newcomers who came to the Bay Area, where I have been living, are highly educated, both men and women. Most of them have families. This refugee statistics is from the UN site, basically. 84 million individuals were forcibly displaced all over the world as a result of some conflict, human rights violation, so on and so forth, despite COVID, which is still higher than many of the previous years, of course. And Turkish people took their share from this unfortunate events. And my constant circle of friends changed after 20 years almost. Many of those families have children, and they are highly educated, high-functioning individuals in Turkey. And as soon as they came here, I observed the things that I didn't realize before. And for instance, depending on their profession, for many of them, for some of them, it was easier to join the workforce. And after my observations, the happiness factor for many refugees are the determining factor for many of them are to join the workforce or not, basically, to be able to do their basic living. Again, as Dr. Nontando said, women, because of their high qualities like compassion, caring attitudes, they automatically assume a role in their family to support everyone, including the kids first, then the husband, and if the time comes, they consider themselves the last, even if they are very high functioning, like doctors, engineers, lawyers, all of them. They give some priority to their family first. They take a supportive role in the Turkish community and overall everywhere, I believe. However, for that reason, women face more obstacles, more barriers in terms of integration into the society. The most basic obstacle or barrier that they face is language. In the current Turkish education system, many of the people learn English to a beginner level mostly. Even if they graduate from an English-speaking university in Turkey, language is still a barrier. For that reason, to be a leader for women or to help them to help them to overcome some of their obstacles, the first thing that a fellow woman should do is to help them learn the language as fast as possible, of course. For that reason, what we tried to do at the beginning was to encourage them to go to the community colleges or to go to adult education schools. But we realized that it wasn't good enough to help them. It didn't help them to learn English. It didn't help them as a support system. For instance, I included a narrative, a quote from a youth who was about 18 years old at the time. They all came to the United States. The young girl picked up language earlier than her parents, obviously. And he said within a few years, she started to be, they exchanged the roles. The girl became the parent and the parents became like the children in the family in the way that she started helping the parents in schoolwork, shopping, and everything. And she also said that especially her mom was calling her at least 10 times a day to ask for help in English. Thankfully, a second. Thankfully, our friends from the Los Altos United Methodist Church came to help at some point. Los Altos United Methodist Church is a local Methodist church and
You are frozen, Nihal.
initiate a conversation partnership project with the Methodist woman and Muslim Turkish woman. Within a very short period of time, like a year or so, about 40 conversation partners, like total 80 people or more, started to communicate on at least weekly basis, couple of hours a week at least. And the local friends, local Methodist friends were helping with the Turkish woman. Within a very short period of time, a very nice community building started to happen, in the sense that it was more than just being a conversation partner, but our Methodist friends were taking the roles of grandparents for the kids and mothers or fathers for the newcomer immigrants, and it was a really wonderful community building project. At every occasion, I would like to express my thanks for my friends, actually. For instance, in one of the instances, our conversation partner, Methodist conversation partner, were even attending the parent-teacher conferences for our Turkish friend, for instance. So we realized that what these immigrants' needs were more than just learning the language, but they needed the support of a close community. Especially as a Muslim immigrant in the United States, when you first come to the area, many things unsettles for you. One of them is your look at Islam from a foreign country, basically. You start to learn your own religion from the beginning because of the Islamophobia, because of the look at Muslim women. Even though Muslim women, most of the times, especially for the Turkish culture, we don't feel inferior to men, for instance. I never felt inferior to men in my life. However, in a country where there is a slight bit of Islamophobia, for instance, you need to check women's role in Islam too. For that reason, the support of family, the support of close community is very crucial. We realized that it wasn't just language, it was the acceptance of an individual in the local community. And this conversation partnership project, in a sense, provided us this close friendship, the healthy friendship that we need in this community. After this conversation partnership gained some popularity in our Turkish community, Los Altos United Methodist Church started to put ads in their newsletters once in a while, couple of times a year, to recruit new conversation partners, of course. After a while, our conversation partners included other Muslims in the country, some Buddhist families, helping Turkish newcomers teach the language, some Hindus, for instance, and most of the time we did our best to do the matching in a if there is a doctor from Stanford University and if there is a doctor incomer to the area, we tried our best to match them both so that the local friends are going to help in terms of helping professionally as well. As of now, some comes into conversation partnership, some goes. Because of the high living standards in the United States, many people move out of the area. And we don't follow them anymore, but they still, I hear that they still keep in touch with their conversation partners because it's a lifetime friendship from now on, I guess. But long story short, we have about 30 to 40 pairs at one time, which is still dynamic and active in that sense. What they are sharing is, I included a picture here with their Los Altos United Methodist Church conversation partners. We started sharing our holidays. Like, this is a picture from a Ramadan dinner where the partners are invited over. So in that sense, the newcomers feel that they belong to the broader community. Okay, so that was a local project that I talked about overcoming the language barrier for Turkish newcomers. The idea, this conversation partnership project, which started in 2017 in the Bay Area by Turkish Muslim refugees, initiated another broader project, which is called Sisters Without Borders. Since many of the newcomers, because of the current situation, have either family or friends or some close relative, whatever you call it, in other parts of the world because of the issues. For that reason, we initiated another project in the broader sense. The name of the project, we called it Sisters Without Borders. And there are two common projects that we proposed and which is still being executed on a daily basis. Anywhere all around the world, regardless of their being Turkish or not, or Muslim or not, whoever asks for some help to learn the languages of English and German, who are resettling somewhere out of their own home countries, if they get in touch with Sisters Without Borders, actually, this organization is offering help to pair them with a conversation partner, with a teacher. Sometimes the classes are all of the time the classes are in Zoom. Even before COVID, it was being held in Zoom environment. But the Sisters Without Borders is an initiative which is helping refugees all around the world, especially women, to learn English and German. As of now, they only have 2 language support system. I hope it will be more languages in the near future. Again, let me add one more project that I'm not doing the project, but a friend of mine is taking the lead on this project. She has a psychology major, so she started this project again to provide a support system to refugees, immigrants in the area during the COVID era. She set up a wellness support group, and she got a grant from a local institution in Alameda County. And she is repeating this wellness support group every year for a couple of months. What they do is they get together, this refugee woman, and with the help of art, the art is sometimes calligraphy, sometimes something else that they decide in the group environment. They do self-care, healing art practices. They communicate with each other. They talk about their self-motivation, time management, and some mindfulness exercises are also going on in small group environments, 8 to 10 people almost. This flyer is from last year's flyer. However, we are going to start another one in the beginning of April that is going to continue until May, basically. To give you a little more idea about what kind of program it was, I included some feedbacks from my friend. Because when we talk about the woman leadership for a minority group, actually woman leadership is not very difficult in the sense that I believe a woman has all the capacity and power within themselves to overcome their own difficulties, in addition to families' difficulties, their husbands' and children's difficulties within them. So when we talk about woman leadership, my understanding is that to be a mirror to a woman so that she can realize her own potential. For that reason, woman leadership is not a very difficult position. That's what I feel. But it is at the same time very crucial. In one of my recent interactions with a faculty member at Santa Clara University, I liked a few terms that she tossed, and one of them was gender bonus rather than gender bias. Meaning any meeting, any religious group, any organization should have women as a bonus in their meetings so that it will be more fruitful. And the other term was angels advocates. A woman should be, instead of devil's advocates, she was talking about being an angel's advocate in the sense that supporting other women. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank all my fellow Turkish women who takes the initiative, like the wellness support group, conversation partnership, their contribution, like 2 cents contribution, they consider 2 cents in their own minds, but it becomes like millions of dollars in somebody else's life. I encourage everyone to keep going. There was a YouTube comment from Anthony, if I am not mistaken, about God's attributes being female attributes of God. Taking this opportunity, I would like to remember a Muslim theologian a great Muslim theologian of his time, Ibn Arabi, who was referring God as she most of the time in many of his writings and everything, because God has female attributes, maybe more than male attributes most of the time. That's why he has been called as the most compassionate, merciful, all these female attributes. I think this is going to end my presentation. Maritza, I feel like I am over time a little bit.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sahan.
Sure,
And now I'd like to invite each of you, if there are any immediate responses or comments you want to make to each other before I go to some of the questions and comments in our chat here. So I'll ask you, Dr. Hadebe, is there anything that you want to respond to immediately, I'll just say, in Dr. Sahan's presentation?
Yeah, I really appreciated, the perspective of circles of women, caretaking. So often women are busy, they're caretaking others, and also, looking at the mental and spiritual health of women. And I thought that this is something that we can learn, in terms of how are we caretaking women themselves in this pursuit of justice and equality, their well-being. I think it's something that I've just noted here, as well as just looking at how stories have been behind the building of this movement, and emphasizing once again the importance of stories. But I really appreciate the insight that you have given, and it has given me something to think about, particularly the mental health of women and small circle care groups to care for that aspect of life. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nontando. Listening to your presentation was very powerful, actually. And I had a strong urge to learn about women in Christianity, which I never did previously. For instance, your sayings about Jesus and how African women are handling being a female in their context made me more curious to learn more, and I will read your writings actually afterwards. Thank you so much. It was very powerful.
How do we thank both of you? These were such rich and, as Bob Short commented, complementary presentations. I mean, we have the Christian and the Muslim perspective from women living in very different and distant parts of the world. I want to go to some of our other comments and questions here. Bill Shreve asked, do you need more conversation partners for the Pacifica Institute or for Sisters Without Borders? Bill lives here in Los Altos and is a strong advocate and leader for environmental work. So he's asking if you need more conversation partners.
Of course, the more the merrier all the time. Thank you, Bill, for your sensitivity. How can we get in touch with Bill, Marita? That would be wonderful.
Yes, I will connect both of you. I
Okay.
have both of your emails.
That's great.
Wonderful. And actually, another question for you, Nihal, from Anthony Pino.
Mhm.
Who is the theologian who refers to God as she?
The name of the theologian is Ibn Arabi, Anthony. He's also famous with being called as Muhyiddin, which means the one who gives lives to the religion. So the full name is Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. The reason that, it is said that most of his teachers, theologian teachers, are female. The most famous female instructor of his is called Fatima, a Muslim woman who was about 90 years or older when she was teaching Ibn Arabi. For that reason, in his books, he referred to God as she or he, not she consistently all the time, but whenever he was highlighting the female features of God, he was calling him as she, referring as her. Whenever he was highlighting the male features of God, he was using he in his writings. Okay.
Okay, one of the things that I want to ask Dr. Hadebe to expand on a little bit is the culture of men and bringing awareness to the options that men have in their cultural models and how you have worked with that, or any opportunity to write about that or teach about that. I wonder if you could comment on that, Dr. Hadebe.
Yes, thank you, Mary. What we are witnessing is the growth of men's movements that are looking at alternative masculinities. And they are saying that violent masculinities that are the ones that make headlines are not the only form of masculinities, and saying that, men need to, and those that belong to those organizations like Men Engage, and many churches are now, forming men's group. We know that there are some men's group that are, perpetuating patriarchy and rigid gender roles. Male is the leader, the woman is subordinate. But there are some that are promoting the equality and also promoting a particular type of relationship where violence is not an option, and talking amongst men as to how do we engage that. And some are even saying, let's look at different even sexualities, because that's also a big thing here, where, people who have different gender identities and different sexualities sometimes are described as un-African and un-Christian. So to be able to talk about different forms of masculinities and how to relate with women in non-patriarchal, non-hierarchical ways. So it's groundwork. It's slowly but surely. And what is nice is that it is being initiated by men. And hopefully the idea is that we can come together, men and women, in a circle and say, where do we go from here? How do we ensure that in our relationships, in our communities, we are promoting a type of leadership that doesn't require violence or hierarchy or those kind of things? So it's a work in progress.
Wonderful. I want to share with you, Dr. Hadebe, two other comments. One from Margie Snyder, who states, what a profound statement. The voices of women reflect the reality of life. And then Pamela Nokuro thanks you for the statement, listen to the woman if you want to change the world. Very powerful words that really point to a direction for our future. And now, Dr. Sahan, we have the director of the Harmony Institute, Mustafa Cenk, wondering if you could give a story of someone a Turkish woman who has been able to successfully integrate into the new culture here in the United States, and how long that takes, on an average, for women to be able to integrate here, coming from Turkey, as an example.
Yeah, sure. That is a very nice question. However, once I heard the question, so many stories came to my mind. It is difficult to pick one from out of all. But let me say the success stories are becoming more random day by day. The first several years are always very difficult. From my observation, not that I went through the difficulty myself, but from my observation, I see first 3 years, 4 years are kind of difficult, depending your language level as well. For instance, one success story after 5 years, maybe, a friend of mine who didn't know English at all, it was very little, but she was a doctor, for instance. Within 5 years period, she studied English first, then she studied for her competency exams, and she passed the third doctoral exam recently, so that she can start practicing soon in the Bay Area as a doctor. Another success story that I find very motivating is several friends of mine found food business, for instance. She is taking care of herself, her family, not to mention that she is helping the other refugees or friends in the other areas of the geography. I find her a very successful initiative, actually. From men, there are so many stories of engineers getting into data science or things like that. Also, the children of the immigrants, we started hearing them getting into UC Berkeley, for instance, which is a great success story that encourages the whole family. Education is very important for many of these highly educated families, and that's a great motivator for the whole family. Would that be good enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. And going back to you, Dr. Hadebe, I have a couple of important questions for you. One is from Joe Okumu, who says that there's a perception in Kenya that attempts to redress gender gaps have led to the exclusion of the boy child, particularly in the coastal region. What advice do you have to give to that situation? And how do you perceive that? Have you seen a similar situation?
Yeah, no, definitely. To start off by saying that the gender justice movement for women is an evolving movement. It's like any justice movement. You start off with those that are the ones that are experiencing the injustice. And then later on, it should evolve to ensure that others are not left behind. And so I think that is the next step, I think, that needs to happen so that we don't have a kind of reverse discrimination. So I think it's an area that needs to be looked into so that gender equality doesn't come at the expense of anyone. It should really be a new way of being, where those that have been, as I said, left behind, particularly women, that those issues are, taken into consideration, but also in the process to be able to listen to other groups like the boy child that are also neglected, and there we look at the intersections of class, ethnicity, and it really is about broadening our analysis and including those that are in the margins, for example, people with disabilities and any other group. So I think that is the next step that needs to evolve. I think with any social justice movement, if we don't evolve, then we also lose the kind of central ethos of liberation, because it to be such that we liberate so that we become the liberators for others. So I think I'm hoping that this is the direction and it is happening, because even when you're looking at the category of woman itself, you still have women with disabilities that are excluded in many instances. So the category of women itself needs to be inclusive, and then broaden the circle to include males as well. So that in the broadening of the circle, you create a culture, a harmony, where we are looking at the dignity of the human person, irrespective of their sex or their gender. That's where we should be heading. So it's a very good question, and thank you for it.
Wonderful. And one more question for you, Dr. Hadebe, and this is a question having to do with, from Bill Shreve again, and it has to do with a partnership they have with an African community where the men seem to control the dialogue. And so it's challenging to redress the gender gaps in the conversation because of that. Do you have any recommendation?
Yeah, no, definitely. We see that, and also even the internalization of culture, where even when women want to speak out, they are put in their place and told them that they are not real African women. So you have those kind of discourses that are meant to put people in their place, using, the values of such like culture. People want to have their culture, and so when that is used to diminish the value or make people feel as if they are not being true to their culture, that's another methodology of keeping people in place. But I think what helps there is, again, to have women in the groups to be empowered, so that they can be in the presence of men and be able to speak up, and without feeling intimidated, and also men to be in their own groups to reflect on why is it there is a need to dominate women, where is that coming from, and to have this kind of separate conversation as part of the journey to harmony, to a place where the dignity of both are respected, and personhood becomes a way of defining people, beyond their genders.
Wonderful. I know we've gone 5 minutes over. I just want to thank both of you immensely and to point out, first of all, with Dr. Sahan's presentation, we are certainly in a world where there are now almost 100 million migrants. I mean, people, refugees migrating from one place, from their home to other countries. And the models that you presented, both the needs, the obstacles that need to be overcome, and the models that are solutions in those countries where refugees come are inspiring and are fairly easy to integrate. And we just need the people with the heart and the vision to do it.
Exactly.
And Dr. Hadebe, your final comment to your presentation. If we want to see change, we have to listen to women and validate who they are, is certainly a way into the future. So how really do I thank both of you for the heart, soul, intellect, sweat, and tears that you've brought behind these words. Thank you very much. We'll close our session today, and you'll be receiving information on our next bi-monthly presentation of Building Human Solidarity, the Voices of Women. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you. Thank you, Dr. Sahan. Thank you to all the participants. We appreciate.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you, Marita, for the invitation. Dr. Nontando, it was a pleasure, and let's keep in touch.
Do that. Let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.